Namaste. Jema. I really like the analogy of the little bird. And I think Lakshmi's story was so interesting when we could hear those sirens going. She's talking about fires. And I think this is one of the sounds of our modern life. There's always something going on. And so I hope today what I'm able to offer you is conceptualization of how to think about our modern life and the stresses in our life. And then my colleague Gayatri will really talk with you about things that you can do to alleviate that stress. So, what causes stress? I think if we want to talk about how to alleviate something, we really ought to know what the cause is. So I would just like a few hands, couple words. What causes stress in your life? Anybody? Lack of sleep. Okay, thank you. Work. Yes, sir. Ego. Well, now you're getting into the Vedanta class. Thank you. Ryan, you had your hand up? Okay. Yeah. Health problems, yes. Overwhelm. Another Vedantist. Noise. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Wonderful. So I'm sure we could just spend the rest of the afternoon talking about what stresses us out. So I just have a few images. Has anybody seen this? This is what it looked like when I drove in today, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's a Sunday. Certainly in our lovely Bay Area, as we're getting more and more dense, the traffic, commuting, being around so many people can be quite stressful. Money. I'll just leave it at that. Somebody said work, absolutely. And then relationships, family, these are all things that can cause us stress. I also added, after Lakshmi was talking, negative self-talk, our internal process. You sort of were alluding to it, Joshua, that not knowing what decisions to make, what we're doing in our own heads. There's many, many things. Great, okay, so that's what causes stress. What do we do to alleviate it? Anybody? Oh, I heard that. I'm really good at that. Shopping. What else? Exercise? Meditation? Drugs and alcohol, yes. Okay. Certainly some other ones. You can't really see the clock on this, and I was telling Gayatri Ji that I wish it said 3 o'clock, but this is the caffeine, sugar, 3 o'clock, middle of the workday, I got to keep going, sort of fueling up. Food, fast food, food on the run, high calorie, high density, high fat foods, oftentimes just what we can grab and go to fuel ourselves. Maybe because we had that noon meeting and forgot to eat lunch, and then we had to get something really fast. Somebody said drugs and alcohol. Happy hour is such a part of our culture these days, our work culture. Sometimes it's not even after work that these things take place. Prescription medications. Also, going to the doctor to medicate away your stress, I think is an increasingly more well-known phenomenon. Scheduling your life, making sure that you have enough time for everything, or overscheduling your life, which we tend to do. I was telling Gayatri Ji a little story that I remember of a friend of mine years ago I saw. He was rushing, and I happened to be sitting outside lounging in the sun or something like that. I think I was pregnant, so I wasn't into moving that much. And I said, Charles, where are you going in such a rush? And he said, well, I'm rushing to my yoga class. And I looked at him, I said, well, that doesn't really seem to make sense to me. Those things don't seem to go together. So I think always being on a run to hurry to relax also can be one of the things that we do to try to de-stress ourselves. And then there's this little sign. I've seen this hanging up in offices. I cut off part of it. If none of those things work, just bang in your head. Sometimes I think is what happens. So the Ayurvedic concept of stress is functionally different than what we've just talked about. So this is a 5,000-year-old conversation. And the focus in Ayurveda isn't on disease management, stress as a disease, which we probably hear a lot of now. It has always been on health promotion. How do we continue to boost our ingrained health? And that is really how Ayurveda thinks about or talks about stress management. In fact, stress isn't even a word. That's not the way that we talk about it. It's really thinking about the alignment of the macrocosm and the microcosm. So when what is outside of us and what is inside of us is out of sync, this is actually what causes us stress. There's in Sanskrit, and you don't need to write this down, it's Loka, Purusha, Sudanta, the individual and the universal principles, that what is outside is inside. And so what we're talking about here are the 5 elements: fire, air, earth, water, space. And I could talk a long time about what does that look like in the world, what does that look like in us, but like Lakshmi Ji said, that this is just the tip of the iceberg, so I want you to understand it conceptually, not drawing down too deeply. Gayatri Ji will talk about it a little bit in her presentation. So things that are outside of us in the world, in the earth, and what's inside of us, if they are not in sync, this is what's causing us stress. And any organism that is outside of its natural environment will, by definition, become stressed. And I thought about if you've ever been to a zoo, oftentimes the animals don't look very happy. And there's many reasons for this. They are not in their natural climate. They don't have their natural predators or food sources around. So this is what we might equate it with sadness, or they're angry, or there's something going on. Either way, they're stressed, as the case may be. And if you think about this from a human perspective, if we separate ourselves from nature, which we have tended to do in our modern life, by definition, we will become stressed. So when we talk about being out of sync with your lifestyle, we're talking about our sleeping habits, our food intake, even our sexual practices. Ayurveda speaks about the mind, body, sensorial, and consciousness connections. And if we don't have those in balance with what's happening in the world at that time, that's going to really stress our organism, ourselves, our bodies. So the question becomes, what really causes stress? Is it everything that we talked about? Is it the traffic, the boss that's yelling at you, the deadline that you're up against? Or is it our ability to withstand the conditions externally? I really like these few images. I don't know if you can see it from where you're sitting, but there's a man playing piano, and then there's a wall of, it looks like military police or something, and he's just sitting there playing the piano. This next image is a couple kissing in the midst of a huge fight. There's people's fists in the air, angry faces. And then you probably have seen something like this, somebody meditating while the world is going by so quickly. So, in other words, stress is really caused by our lack of internal fortitude to be able to deal with the external reality. That's kind of heavy because that puts that on us to do something about it. I actually think it's a much bigger task to try to solve the traffic problems in the Bay Area, unless you're an urban planner and that's what you do, then that probably is quite stressful. However, Ayurveda says we have the responsibility to figure out how to take care of ourselves internally to be able to withstand the changing conditions in our environment. So the answer to stress in the Ayurvedic perspective is something called dinacharya. And dina translates to daily, and acharya translates to routine, or discipline. And I really like this image, and it might be a little bit hard to see. It's evoking the changing nature of the world, the seasons. One can think about it even the time of day, the time of our life. And Dinacharya, which Gayatri Ji will talk a little bit more in depth about and give you some practical tools, is about your routine, your food routine. Times when we need to sleep, ways to get better quality sleep, why we must wake up at a certain time. And there's a concept in Ayurveda called brahmacharya, which is healthy sexual practices. There's a whole routine around that as well. So something to think about to make this maybe resonate a little bit more. If you just look outside in the world and observe what's going on. For example, when I first came to Vedika this afternoon, it was around 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And I sat across the way and just kind of observed what was going on. I think I saw like 6 different kinds of butterflies and bees and flies and spiders, and things were just really moving. There was a lot of activity at that time. And I just thought, okay, this is what's happening. There's a lot going on. Another thing that I think about, we're so blessed in the Bay Area to have such wonderful seasons that we have year-round farmers markets. And I think this is a great way, if you don't already shop at a farmer's market, to get in tune with the seasons. For example, I'm a big fan of stone fruit. I really enjoy peaches and plums, and I wait until May-ish for those to arrive, because they don't arrive before that. That is not when they're ready. And if you try to eat a peach from the market, not the farmer's market, but the grocery store in December, it kind of doesn't taste right. It's because that's not its season, right? Think about if you're an early riser like I am. I set my alarm, but before my alarm goes off, I hear the birds chirping, and they're actually my alarm. And there were times where I got really annoyed with them chirping. I was just on the East Coast for vacation, and I thought, oh great, I could sleep in a little bit more. I heard those birds chirping, and I just had to get up. I heard them, and they usually chirp before the sun rises. And so I'm thinking, okay, they know what's going on. Something's going on. And you see them as soon as the sun starts to set. There's not a lot of birds flying around in the sky. So these are the kind of things that we can do to observe what is nature telling us about the rhythms, and how can we maybe align a little bit more with those kinds of rhythms as a way to gain our internal fortitude, to begin to de-stress ourselves. So my ask for you as I transition to Gayatri Ji is to pay attention to these rhythms of nature, to your health habits, at the times of day you get up, the meals, the choices you make. Just observe yourself. When you are feeling stressed, what is the first thing that your mind thinks? Then what do you do subsequent to that? Just really check in with yourself. Like Lakshmi said, Ayurveda is very much an experiential science. This isn't just a lecture. This is just to remind you what you already have within you and what's all around you. The world is our teacher, the world is our healer, and we all have the internal capacity to be free from stress. Even living in the Bay Area, even commuting, having a family, dealing with our own thoughts. So I will turn it over to Gayatri Ji to really give you some key tips on what you can do to help you in your practice.